Okay, Alexandra.
Hello.
I don't know if you know each other. I don't know if Anna and Javi, do you know about Irving, Marianne, and Jane and Alexandra?
No, not not some of them. I have not the pleasure, but nice to meet you.
Well, we have 2 minutes if you want to introduce yourself. Anna, if you want to start.
Okay, nice to meet you. I am assistant associate professor at the Complutense University in Madrid, and my field of research is cartels and imperfect competition. And now I have another line of research like entrepreneurship or something like that, but the main line is cartels and antitrust, and I have a few things published about this topic.
Sure. You, Javi?
And me, well, thanks for coming, first of all. Sunday. I appreciate that. I am professor at the University of Barcelona, and I always been doing diffusion of economic ideas. So in institutionalization, professionalization, diffusion in different realms, politics, universities, associations, journals, etc., etc. And well, let's see what you think of my my presentation today.
Alexandra, is your first HES conference?
Yes, my first.
Yes. Do you want to introduce yourself? Then next year or the other years when we can meet, we can say, hello, Alexandra.
Yeah, hello, I'm Alexandra. I'm a doctoral researcher here in Zurich in Switzerland, and I work on economic modeling and on narratives there. So it's my first experience, and it's virtual, but at least it takes place, so that's good.
Hi, Guilhem. Hi, Nicola. Jane, I don't know if it's your first HES conference. Your first one? You want to introduce yourself very quickly and then...
Yes, sure. Yes, it is my first conference. Very interesting. Like, I did attend a session yesterday. I thought, okay, I'm definitely over my head here. But this great. I'm at University of Vermont. I'm a monetary historian primarily, and I'm very interested in just, the history of central banking. Thank you.
Guilhem, I don't know if it's your first HES conference, but probably Anna or Javier or Alexandra or the others, they don't know you. Do you want to introduce you very quickly while we attend?
So it's my first HS conference. So I would have preferred something real, but yeah, so it's a good start, let's say, for next time. So yeah, no, so I'm I already saw a couple of you in the last session were presented. So I'm working on the the philosophy and methodology of behavioral economics, on the history of microeconomics and game theory also. Yeah.
Nicola? Even if I think everybody knows you. You want to introduce yourself? Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm Nicola Giocoli, and I'm professor at the University of Pisa, and I'm quite used to take part to the HES. I'm an historian of economics. First, I studied the history of game and decision theory, and now in the last few years, I'm studying the history of American antitrust law and economics. That's it.
Thank you. And you, Irving?
I'm professor of economics now at Bard College Berlin, curator of the web blog Economics in the Rearview Mirror, which basically features what I'm interested in, the training of economists, primarily in the United States from about 1870 to 1970.
Maxime, you want to introduce yourself? It's because there are many people, there is their first HES conference, so to meet each other, even if it's online.
Yes, hi, my name is Maxime de Marais-Tremblay. I'm a lecturer in economics at Goldsmiths, University of London. And I just spent the last 4 months at Duke as a visiting fellow. And I'm working mostly on the history of public finance with a focus on conceptual history.
Okay, and Marianne?
Hi, I'm Marianne Johnson. I'm at the University of Wisconsin in Oshkosh, and I work on the history of public finance as well, usually along two streams. One is the Wisconsin institutionalists, which I'll talk about today, and then the other is more mid-20th century with James Buchanan.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm Rebeca Gomez Betancourt. I'm based in Lyon. I'm also a historian of monetary thought, but I also work in women and economics, and in particular in feminist economics. So then I think now we can start. Welcome to the new HESers colleagues. Hope we can meet next year in person. So the first paper is by Ana Rosado. I suggest, as we did with Guillaume Vallée, I have this collective project on the progressive era. We give 20 minutes maximum for presentations and 10 minutes for discussion. And well, all the comments, suggestions, general remarks we are very open, because this is a project that we are starting. We have a publication on next year, but this is something that we want to work with many other colleagues too. So please, Anna, if you want to share your screen with your PowerPoint, please feel free to do it.
Okay, tell me if you can see my screen. Yes? Okay. Thank you all of you for, let me do something. Okay, that's it. Okay. This paper is about the cartelization of business in the United States at the beginning of the 20th century and the problems that these cartelizations created. This is a very old idea of research. What's happened when the companies crash with the politicians, and when the companies never agree about the regulation or the control of their activities. And this is a paper of this these main three debates, because there are several debates, but I collect only three. The state must to prevent the behavior of companies, or only they try to collect evidence in order to change or to advise the companies to do something. The second debate is if they can control. That means if the state can enter in the company and say something and order something to change into the company. And the last one, it is the necessity or not of the reform of the Sherman Law because the Sherman Law is at the end of the 19th century, and big companies began at the beginning of the 20th century, and the politicians considered that the Sherman Law must be reformed because they consider it's not enough, and they like to change it. Finally, I include a few conclusions. What is the historical context of my research? The historical context is that at the end of the 20th century, at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, the American companies became bigger and more powerful than ever. At the beginning of my research, I found that the companies are creating a process of manufacturing, new ways of production, and the mood is necessary the survival of the fittest. The companies are competing to each other, and one must to survive, and the other must to die because they are not competitive. And what's happened? It happened that the main companies, the biggest companies in the United States, and the businessman who ruled these companies began to be very important person, and also they control policymakers. The photo is that this is the big companies, they are controlling the state. This is a cartoon from this time, from the end of the 19th century. And the three main economists able to change or able to discuss about what's going on at this moment and the necessity to change something, they were Ellie Clark and Jeremiah Jens, because they thought that the companies control the wealth of the society because they control prices. The name of this man, of the businessman at this moment, the name was Robert Barons, and the argument of the Robert Barons were they are doing business. And then it was necessary to do something. Okay, what was the arguments? In the first debate, I proposed the debate of prevention. The arguments for the economists and also the influencing politicians, it was that the monopoly prevention has to do with protecting the public interest, because the big corporations are manipulating the prices, and then it's necessary to prevent this behavior. The idea is it was mainly from John Bates Clark and also Jeremiah Jens, because the arguments are quite different, because Clark said that the companies bring down prices, but in any case it's necessary to prevent their behavior. And Jeremiah Jens says the prices, it was growing up. The prices rise because of the monopolies get it by the companies. And they are two discordant voices in this debate about prevention. One is George Ganton. He pointed out that from different years, he made a table of the behavior of prices. This is a very interesting table, and with prices of commodities and wages, and you can see the behavior of prices and wages. And he said the prices are down, and this is the main argument to support that the big companies increase the welfare of workers, because the wages, the real wages, are growing up, and this is a transference of wealth from the companies to the working class. And it's not necessary to prevent monopoly, because this is the normal behavior of markets, and it's not necessary that the intervention in the companies. And the argument, the contra argument, was Richard Ely, and he said that it's real, the prices are felt, but because of the companies are selling at a cost, is not the normal behavior of prices. Is the prices go down because of the manipulation of the prices by the companies. Of course, Ely didn't have data to confirm his idea. I collect more information about what's going on at this moment. And the argument of the companies, it was that the concentration is necessary, because it doesn't matter about prices, because the point it was that if they are not able to enlarge the capital, if they don't have economies of scale, they are not able to survive. And then if the economists and the politicians only look at the price behavior, then it's not a good indicator of the market's wealth. And then the Robert Barons, the owners of these companies, they said that is the only acceptable correction of the arguments, it was that the evidence. It was not necessarily the prevention. They are able to go to the trial, but they need evidence. I think it's very interesting, this point about, because really the final of the debate is that the robber barons were right, and now it's necessary to collect evidence in order to bring a company in a trial. This is Rockefeller, and Rockefeller said the American beauty rose can be produced in all its splendor only by sacrificing the early buds that grow up around it. This is the argument of the robber barons. What was the consequence of this debate? In 1941, George Stigler organized the TENEC, and it was the first federal intention of federal work to collect data about prices and to collect data about concentrations. And at the end of the 19th, we can see that the guidelines and the limit price paradigm get the use of this argument, the behavior of prices and the measure of concentrations in order to punish the companies, but not before. Also, in the guidelines in the 1980s, they use the same measure of bad behavior of companies. In this moment, the name is no behavior of prices. At this time, the name it was small but significant and non-transitory increase in price test. Okay, let me go to the second debate. Is the capacity or not that the states control the corporations. And of course, the target it is to protect customers. That is necessary that the states do something about companies or not. And of course, the limit is the abuse of a big company. And we found different economists doing or saying the same things. Clark, of course, is in favor of some kind of control. Allen Young, of course, agreed with control, the monopoly. And Tausig said, of course, control, but with limits. And Wiman said that the American society demanded some kind of regulations because the abuse of the companies, and then the state must do something. Of course, the robber barons, the companies, they have something to say because they are the owners of these companies, and what's happening if the state control or manipulate or do something into the company. And of course, they don't like it. And the argument is quite simple. They are no politicians or public thinkers. They are the rich. They own America. This is a good argument. And George Ganton, it was in favor of the robber barons, and she said that the efficiencies, that means the economy of scale, the behavior of prices, and the concentration of capital, etc. They are the normal behavior in a market for big companies. And this is only efficiency. It is not necessary to control the companies because they are doing things in order to be more and more efficient. And then they going down prices, etc. This is the face of the 4 more important robber barons. They are almost 30, but they are the most important person. And here you have another argument. When the Bureau of Economic Research asked to have Meyer about the price of the sugar price, and do you in fact control the product and price in the United States? And they said, yes, we undoubtedly do. That means they know what they are. What's happened with the American society and the mood of the American society at this moment? And I think the main argument it is what means economic power. And these people, the robber barons, those millionaires represent less than, I am not able to say that, 0.000% of Americans' population, and they control at this moment 20% of the wealth nation. Carnegie, one of the robber barons, controlled 2/3 of the American steel production. And Cornelius Vanderbilt, of course, knew how to buy and do different business things. But the extracurricular help from the federal government, it is the most important thing he was able to do. And he became rich because of that. According to Chandler, these people, these big companies, controlled or administrated the flow of the suppliers of raw materials, the process of production, distribution, and they control the whole market, not only the product or the production of one of steel or whatever. They control the cluster of the companies who work for them. And also, this is something similar to the argument from John Blaze Clark in the 1940s, because the argument is they selling below cost to expel rivals. And then it's impossible to survive if you are competing with this kind of companies. And here we have the arguments of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Okay, they don't need the law because they have the power. And what's happened after this debate in the United States? Of course, again, George Stigler in the 1941 got the neck. But the most important is the influence in the American guidelines, mainly the work of Harold Dempsey in the 1973, because he said we have to measure the concentration, but not always is monopoly. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And the next argument, it was included in the guidelines in the 1982 and 84 when they included the efficiency. This is the argument of George Ganton when he said it's necessary to measure the efficiency more than the concentration of the power of the market, etc. And finally, Stephen Salop include the minimum viable scale in order to measure the power, know the concentration, and know the market control. That means this is a way to measure the efficiency. And the third and last debate, it was necessary to reform the Sherman Law, and the answer, it was yes. And because of that, the Clayton and Federal Trade Commission Act passed in 1914. And the Clayton Act, it was to protect trade and commerce and any unlawful restraints and monopolies. And here, I think I am out of time. Here you have the main points in the Sherman Law in order to help the American customers. But what's happened with politicians? They are two main politicians who support the reform of the Sherman Law. One it was the president, Theodore Roosevelt, and he said that it was necessary, according to Chandler, he was necessary that he used all his political skill in order to get the bill passed. And the second one, it was Louis Brandeis, who was the person more interested in change, in reform, the Sherman Law, and because he believed that big business could become big only through illegitimate means. And this belief changed the Sherman Law at the beginning of the 20th century in the United States. And here we have the last conclusion, the first conclusion of my paper. I use the information of the Economist and how was the behavior of big companies in the United States 100 years ago. And you can see that this is on the top, and clear blue is the United States new entrants in big companies, and the dark blue is the Europeans new entrants in big companies. And you can see there is less and less companies enter in the big companies in the market. And finally, a few conclusions. The main conclusion of my papers is that according to my research, markets are not generally have the capacity to self-correct either quickly or in the long run. That means it's necessary some kind of regulation of markets. In order to get the best way to regulated market is necessary a good market definition, and this is quite difficult to have a market definition. If you are interested in, we can speak about that later. And finally, it was not for the beginning of the 20th century, and it was not either today, easy task to make companies and regulators agree, because the fight against them is bigger in any time. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. You respect the time perfectly.
Oh, thank you.
Do you want to stop sharing your PowerPoint?
Yes, I'm.
I think you if you closed in the top to the right, you see the X. If you close, then we come back to full screen.
Okay, I'll do it. Let me. Oh my goodness, something is wrong. Something is wrong here, and let me see this one. No.
Maybe if I try to share mine, I will stop it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Rebeca.
Let me see now. How can I? How can I? Okay, I don't know who wants to start with questions or comments. Just 1 second. Who wants to start? Yes, please, Javi.
I'm actually I'm very curious about what you said at the end about market definition. So what you said that we can discuss it later on, but I really want to know what you mean by that. Well, what's the importance of this in the frame of your paper?
Okay. Market definition is a sticky concept in antitrust, and because it's how many big companies are in a market and which is the size of each one into the market. And normally, if they are 5 or 6 companies controlling more than 70%, this is a cartel, or the market is something close to the monopoly. And it was that way until the Microsoft case. And in the Microsoft case, the market definition, it was redefined. And the argument it was everybody can buy or can use Microsoft if they want. And Microsoft control 90%, but it's because of the customers choose to use Microsoft. And then how can be Microsoft guilty of something? And also the argument it is if you define it, the market as the European or American market for Microsoft, of course, Microsoft control 90% of the market. But what's happened if the market is defined using the world? That means the Asia, the America, and the Africa, and then Microsoft control only 15% of the market. And this is not a way to punish a company. And now is a sticky topic, because in any trial, the main point is how do you define the market? Which is the market? What means market? This is the first point to the final production, but also in the inputs, in the middle of the inputs of production in some product. Also, you can say the company control the outsourcing, the company control the providers, the company control inputs or not. And this is the other way to define the market. The final product, the middle productions, etc. I don't know if I talk to you clearly in English.
Yeah. So so it's basically a technical concept that I was thinking
Exactly.
okay, I was thinking on something like well, more in the direction you were just saying now, to what extent can you define the market, and I don't know if it was relevant in the time you are studying, if there is a very concrete concept.
Exactly, it's a concept. It's in a trial how the defendant and the lawyer define the market in front of the judge. Yeah.
Any other question or comments, suggestions? I have a question linked with the period you are studying.
Yeah.
When did you start? When did you finish? And also, what are the progressive ideas? I mean, link with this progressive era that we are studying in this project. How do you consider, or how can you characterize these different persons, these different, from one side, the economists like Eli or Tosic, and for another, or Clark's, Jenks, and for another part, these very rich persons, because so it's more linked about the ideas and the debates. What is the period, and for you, if you think in the progressive era, for you, why this debate is typically part of the progressive era?
Thank you for the question. My period is the end of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, because I have information about, I read a lot of articles about the beginning of the 20th century, because it was the moment that these debates took place. When the people began to write about the necessity of doing something, about the mood of the society, and how they be in touch with politicians to do something. It's the moment when they ask to do something, because it's unbearable. The situation for the American society is unbearable. This is the moment. And I think this is exactly the finish of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th. Okay.
Well, if there is no, if there are not other questions, maybe we can start the second presentation by Marianne. Thank you, Anna. I'm looking forward to
Thank you.
discussion of the papers. Marianne, I don't know if you want to share. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, you can see the PowerPoint. Okay, thank you. So this paper deals with sort of the Wisconsin contribution to tax policy in the later, very, very late 1800s and the early 1900s. Wisconsin had sort of its own stream of progressivism. It shared a lot with other aspects of progressivism nationally. It was a response to sort of this great change in society, industrialization, urbanization, mass immigration, labor and social unrest, inequality. In fact, in Wisconsin in 1886 in southern Milwaukee, they had 12,000 workers go on strike in March on a steel mill. And the governor at the time freaked out, deployed the National Guard, and they shot and killed 7 people. Right? It's made national news. So it's big, dramatic, right? Evidence of labor unrest in the heart of, the United States. And this sort of facilitated the rise of the guy in the top left here. That's Fighting Bob La Follette. He was the leading progressive politician in Wisconsin for 30 years, governor, senator to the US Senate. He ran for president and lost in the 1920s. But between him and people like John R. Cummins and Richard T. Ely, Wisconsin became what was called the Laboratory for Democracy. So they had the first national minimum wage laws, some of the first labor safety laws, the first Unemployment Insurance Act. That's the lower picture here. They're signing it. There's Cummins, Harold Gross, Elizabeth Brandeis Rauschenbusch, were all economists at the University of Wisconsin who made contributions. Right? And that was the idea, the Wisconsin idea. Right, that the government and the university professors would combine to create a better society. Sort of the ultimate manifestation of a belief in experts. Anyway, like we saw in Friday's presentations for both Pedro and Rebecca, there's a really strong moral component to the reform that's rooted in various kinds of religious revivalism. And Ely, right, he has a famous quote that he wanted to become part of the American Economic Association platform, that the state was an educational and ethical agency whose positive aid is an indispensable condition for human progress. But of course, if you want a bigger state, you need more money, right, to pay for it. So my idea in this paper was to examine 3 prominent Wisconsin economists who worked on taxes. Richard T. Ely, who left Johns Hopkins to come to Wisconsin in 1892, and he was there for nearly 30 years. Fairly eclectic economist with roots in the classical, German historical, statistical, and even some marginalist inclinations, if you read his later versions of Outlines of Economics. He's very much a social reformer. He was connected with Chautauqua for a very long time. And a lot of his early contributions to economics were in and around the subject of taxation. Thomas S. Adams, he was a Johns Hopkins student, Ely had already left, but Ely's influence was still quite strong at the time at Johns Hopkins. He joined Wisconsin in 1901 after assisting with the Puerto Rican tax mission, which might have been actually the first American tax mission to an emerging or developing country. That time, the United States had just reclaimed Puerto Rico from the Spanish after the Spanish-American War. He was very much a tax specialist and a tax engineer. He wrote the state income tax law, which was the first in the nation in Wisconsin, and he largely wrote big portions of the federal income tax law when it came into being. He left Wisconsin for Yale in 1913. John R. Commons, really not in any way a public finance or tax specialist. Most of what he talks about regarding taxes are kind of, just related to his other interests, primarily labor reform. But it's hard to talk about Wisconsin without talking about John R. Commons, right? Because he's really the center of the department. He's driving the research agenda for most everybody there. So the main question I wanted to ask in this paper was, how did three prominent Wisconsin economists come to the brink of reconceiving taxes as social policy, and why did they stop where they did? And so most of the history of taxation and tax policy before maybe the middle 1800s and even well into the late 1800s, taxes are a necessity, right? You need money to pay for government services, things like the provision of justice, national defense. And so the taxes are merely, right, the vehicle by which you're going to raise the money. Taxes to achieve things other than raising money, right, is a newer concept, particularly taxes to achieve redistribution and create greater inequality. So there's no doubt that taxation in this period needed serious reform. At the federal government, they relied primarily on tariffs, right, which were highly regressive and fell primarily on the poor, and sort of a weird assortment of property taxes that taxed literal property, right? So buildings and land, but it missed most capital income. So in the presentation we just heard, the robber barons and all their huge riches from manufacturing remained essentially untaxed, right, under income tax policy at the time. So as part of the paper here, we'll talk about tax reform as a broader part of the broader progressive agenda. Tax reform is necessary to achieve the progressive agenda, but we don't get so far as tax reform to improve inequality, even though it was widely recognized as a huge problem. To try to keep this manageable, I wanted to focus specifically on the academic sort of economic arguments made for tax reform, right? Commons, Ely, and even Adams. If you go to the Wisconsin Historical Society, there's, between the three of them, there's probably 500 boxes of archival materials. There's speeches, there's newspaper articles, there's reports, there's statistical studies, there's what they wrote academically. And so to try to kind of keep things under control, I wanted to focus on the academic arguments that they made. And I tried to limit the analysis to the period between about 1880 and 1910. Right, because once the US income tax, which I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about in the next presentation, comes into being, or the amendment in 1913, and then when the US enters World War I, right, everything's different. So things really change. That said, I really face the same problem that Pedro was talking about on Friday, which was there's still too much material. So I tried to stay out of the income tax debate. I'm not sure if that's a good idea or if it's even possible, but we'll see. So where are these people coming from? If we look at the 19th century American economic thought, Adam Smith is easily the dominant starting point here. He lays out in The Wealth of Nations, right, taxes are for defense, justice, public works, public education, and maintenance of the sovereign, right? And his criteria for a good tax are things like minimum economic distortion, equality of sacrifice, certainty of funds, convenience of payment, and economy of collection. The Americans sort of created their own sort of domesticated version of classical economics. Francis Wayland and Francis Walker, the father Francis Amasa Walker, were two leading practitioners. There's a really strong religious element in all of this, in this work. The laws of economics and the laws of moral science, right, or religion, Wayland says, they correspond directly. And it's amazing that they all correspond to laissez-faire individualism as well. But apparently that's the divine will. Anyway, so Wayland, his Elements of Economics was easily the biggest textbook, right, throughout the early and middle 1800s. He has a policy that taxation should be heaviest upon articles of luxury and ostentation, but not for the sake of interfering with these modes of happiness, right? But because those who can afford luxury products, right, have the best ability to fork over some money to pay their taxes. Right, so it's not to change behavior, it's not as policy, it's merely functional, right? That these people have the money. And then following Smith, right, he says, taxes are for funds for the public after they've been collected, and they should pay for civil government, education of the people, maintenance of institutions of religion, national improvements, right, pauperism and war. Francis Walker, right, is in the period immediately after the Civil War. He's still following Adam Smith, right, laissez-faire, minimum taxation is necessary. Right, so the government can only claim as much as it needs, right? It should make no additional claims on the people. However, by the time we get to the 1880s, right, we've got this boom and bust economy in the United States, monopolies, cartels, right, are becoming the main features of economic life. And it was no longer the case, right, that America could sort of ignore its cobbled together tax system or problems of inequality. Right, so Walker said, when Walker wrote right after the Civil War, he said, there's little consequence, right, of poverty in the United States, where very few in this country are found in that condition, right? It was quite obvious, right? By the time Ely gets to graduate school in the 1880s, this wasn't the case. Ely complained that classical political economy failed to provide any useful insights into these problems, right? The whole spirit is negative, it has nothing to say. And he really complained about sort of the deductivist tax shifting analysis, right? Like, for a lot of reasons. First, that, well, maybe theoretically true that you could shift the taxes. He always felt that it would take too long. People would never get their money back. People wouldn't recognize, right, that the taxes were shifted. And so it'd be much easier to be more precise and put the taxes where you want them in the first place. So if we think about the sort of things that we're pushing, right, these three economists, but really progressives and economists nationwide, into reconsidering tax policy, right, I sort of identified three big things that were going on in this period. The first was Henry George's Progress and Poverty. So for him, he identified the inequality of wealth and opportunity as the greatest curse and menace of modern civilization. And his remedy was tax reform, right, sort of. And so his single tax plan was going to confiscate the rent or wealth generated from land. And he thought that this could cover the entirety of government expenditures. It wouldn't be shifted, right? So it would remove sort of the biggest regressive elements of the current tax system. But not only that, right? The single tax could raise wages, increase the earnings of capital, extirpate pauperism, afford free scope to human power, lessen crime, elevate morals and taste and intelligence, purify government, and carry civilization to yet nobler heights, right? So it's a pretty big claim. Ely, Commons, and Adams, all three of them took the single taxers very seriously, although they didn't find the economics particularly convincing. Ely took his students to see George speak in Baltimore when he was on his speaking tour. Commons established the Henry George Club at Oberlin as an undergraduate. When he gets to Johns Hopkins, he realized it was maybe a little overly simplistic as a theory. And Adams, who writes a lot about very specific tax policy changes, when he would write about a flat national income tax, he would always weigh that against, you know, sort of the alternatives. And one alternative was a single tax, right? So even in academic journal publications, right, he takes this as a serious contender, right, as to what tax policy could be. George generally was really unpopular, right, with the professional economists. Right? Here's this self-made, self-studied man who emerges on the scene right at the moment, right? They're trying to establish economics as a professional discipline. And so they all kind of coalesce against him. But at the same time, it's a national bestseller, right? #1 economic bestseller of the century. The second major influence that pushed these economists in a new direction was the influence of the German historical school. This is taxation in historical and evolutionary context, right? That some tax systems are fine for a newly established country, but once you become sort of an urbanized, industrialized nation, you need a new form of taxation. You need to reconsider taxation. They combine this with the use of social statistics, right? Very much in the history of Adolf Wagner, the German public finance economist. And in fact, Ely, Commons, and Adams, all three of them produced quite a number of tax commission reports. Right? So it was very popular in the 1880s and 1890s for cities and states to commission these groups to study the current tax system. So how much money was coming in, how much money was being lost, where were people cheating the system, and if we are going to put a different tax system in place, what sort of revenues did they anticipate? So the big statistical studies. But none of them wanted to go so far as Wagner, where the taxing power was to be used as a lever for bringing about a more desirable distribution of wealth. Right? And we'll see why that's the case. For the Americans, there's also this sort of long shadow. The entire 19th century was sort of a roller coaster of tariff debates with different special interests taking control of government at different times. So you had the merchants and the bankers who are very much laissez-faire free traders. And then you had the rising manufacturing class who wanted protectionist tariffs and made a lot of industry arguments. And just depending on the cycle of power in government at the time, they would either have high protectionary tariffs, right, or they would fall. But it made the tariffs so political that Francis Whalen, in one of his early textbooks, says he's not even going to talk about it, because if he attempts to talk about the tariffs, people won't take him seriously as a scientist. So he just takes it off the table. In part, it's sort of a cautionary tale, right, about how an economic issue can be hijacked into politics. But it also made it really obvious to these economists, right, that tax policy can drive government policy. In fact, Commons says, even when not consciously intended to be regulated, taxes nevertheless regulate, for they, like the protective tariff, determine the direction in which people may become wealthy. So we wind up with, at this point, all three, although predominantly Ely and Adams, are writing on taxation and pushing taxation in new directions. Ely sees taxation as a vehicle to social policy, but it's not the taxes, right, that are going to change things. It's the services provided by the revenues raised, right? So he says taxation itself is not an evil, it's a blessing. It's what makes civilization possible. Taxes fund the police, public schools, state universities, sewage, sanitation, gas, and electric, public parks, public baths, public libraries, right? He writes about it. And his point is that not to equalize incomes through taxation, but to create better equality of opportunities, right, across social classes, right? So you have the tools or the mechanisms by which, right, you can raise yourself in life. But both Ely and Adams were reluctant to sever that link between taxes and spending, right? Taxes were for the purpose of spending. They weren't for other things. There's also a strong desire to improve the morality of taxation, right? The property tax system at the time encouraged fraud. It encouraged bribery of public officials. It encouraged undervaluing of property. And they both thought this was morally repugnant. This is bad for the individual who is pushed into a situation, right, where they should lie. It's bad for the tax collectors who are bribed, and it's bad for society. Right? The smaller property owners bear the whole burden. The tax system is funded on evasion, undervaluation, and perjury. Right? The Commons asks the more important problem. The more important problem, right, is not what rate will yield the largest revenue. Equally important is the question, at which rate will the burden be most equally distributed and the repressive effects on industry and morals be minimized? This is sort of the fuzzy part of the paper that I haven't dealt with yet, which is the connection between taxation and inequality. Right? There's there's gross inequalities in the system, but they don't quite want to use taxes to redistribute incomes yet. This is partly practical. All three were big proponents of the national or the federal income tax, and they all wanted a flat tax, right, to hit primarily the highest incomes. They felt a progressive tax would be a bit too socialistic for American tastes. And this is partly, I think, a hangover from Ely's academic freedom child. So in the mid 1890s, he was out of state, and the Oshkosh superintendent of schools brought a claim that he was teaching socialism, right? And he was inoculating students to socialism. And Ely didn't want to defend himself, but the whole thing blew out of proportion, and he had to come back to Wisconsin. And there was probably the United States' most important academic freedom child. The state of Wisconsin found in favor of Ely, so did the university. That he was merely teaching what the options were. He wasn't trying to tell anyone to be a socialist, but it made him much, much more cautious in the sort of policies that he recommended after that. This is another part of the paper that I haven't really, I just don't quite know what to do. So if you have suggestions, I would be very willing to hear them, which is the progressive / institutionalist view as taxation as sort of a manifestation of power, of class power, of political power, right? And so Ely talks about how taxes can create monopolies or prevent them. It can diffuse wealth or concentrate it. It can promote liberty and equality, right? Or it can promote tyranny and despotism, right? And how to walk this line, right? Between the necessity of taxes as politics, right? And taxes as social policy. It's a difficult problem. So a few conclusions. We can see that these three, the Wisconsin economists here, tax reform for them is part of the broader progressive reforms, right? They can't achieve many of the other reforms if they can't get tax reform first, because they need a bigger state, they need a bigger state apparatus, and they need to pay for it. Their statistical studies were really quite convincing to academics, politicians, and even the general public that tax reform was quite necessary. However, their sort of historical contextual analysis convinced them that Americans wouldn't accept taxes as social policy, right? They thought Americans were fundamentally anti-statist and anti-socialist. And so Adams says, whatever the requirements of ultimate justice in regard to progressivity, right? Any high degree of progressivity in the near future would probably prove fatal to the local income tax in which it was introduced. No income tax at present can violate the ethical standards of the great mass of persons who are called up to pay the taxes and succeed. So the paper's nearly done. Ironically, I think if we were in Utrecht, I would actually have a draft because I get a lot of work done when I travel to conferences, but instead I'm at home and students and exams and, anyway. A few of the things I'm struggling with is the scope of the paper. Is it too big? Is it too broad? Is there a coherent story here? Dealing with the campaign for the US federal income tax, which is a huge topic all by itself, right? There's books on this. How to deal with the vast quantity of materials produced by Ely, Adams, and Commons, right? And condense it into a story. And how to address the issue of inequality as sort of a very subset area of the tax reforms. So I would be very happy to hear any comments or suggestions, questions.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Who wants to start? Who wants to be the first? Nicola?
Yes, thank you, Marianne. Very, very interesting. How should I call it? Half paper. Okay, but I mean it's really on something very, very important. My question is maybe just a curiosity, because I guess most of you know that the 1912 presidential campaign in the US turned quite a lot on the issue of antitrust, monopoly, and the campaign fought by three presidents: Wilson, Taft, and Roosevelt. While, as far as I know, the income tax wasn't so important as antitrust during that campaign. That was really a tough battle. But maybe what you said just in the end of your presentation, maybe this is an answer, because it was maybe not so politically convenient to push too much along this issue of establishing an income tax. In the sense, you get elected and then you do it, but you don't talk about it before the elections. But I'm curious to know what you think about this.
Excuse me, do you prefer we collect the question and then you answer, or what do you prefer answer?
Sure, I was just going to push that question to Javier, because I think he might have a better answer than me. So we will see.
We can also collect the question. I don't know,
Okay.
was Maxime or Javier first? Please.
Yeah,
Maxime, please go.
Yeah, well, I was, thanks for the presentation, fantastic, and with lots of information for me, so it's great. I'm interested in this part when you said that these economists didn't campaign for the income tax for the sake of not harming actually the possibility, right? I wanted to ask you, when they take this position? It was regarding the income tax. I'm studying that of 1894, or it was later when the campaign of 1913.
Definitely the later campaign. I think Adams didn't really come into his own as economist until like 1900 when he finished graduate school, and then he was one of the main architects for the federal income tax. And so I think it was his view that was the dominant view, that it's going to be a flat tax because we know Americans won't accept progressivity, and this is really just practical tax engineering. It's boring, it's not political. But I think it's definitely later. Yes.
Maxime?
Thank you. This is very interesting, and there's a wealth of material. I just ticked on one thing you said. I forgot who it was who in his book decided not to talk about tariff policy because this was a too political issue. And in a way, it struck me because at the time I would have thought that most people who would be writing about taxation were not economists. And so the idea that something like tariff is an economic question was not obvious to me. So in a way, is that what they're saying already, that tariffs is an economic question, should be the reserved to economists in a world in which there's probably more lawyers writing about these things in the late 19th century. So I'd be curious to know what you think about this. And the other is more like a question, because you frame one of the theses of the paper in terms of what we don't find in their writing in terms of social policy, then it brings me to ask you about how analyzing their work there changes your view of the writings of the next generation, right? So of Harold Groves, for instance, on whom you wrote a lot. And so do you see Groves, for instance, or others of Groves' generation in a different light now that you spend more time analyzing the previous generation?
I'll take the second one first, because when I wrote the abstract or the proposal for this paper, I really thought that they were going to go farther in terms of taxes as social policy. And I was surprised that sort of they get almost right there, but then it's too socialist, it's too European, it's too it's just one step too far, I think, for that early generation. But I think it would be interesting to then think about how the progressives in the later period, right, in the 1920s, and then going into the New Deal and the Great Depression, if they push, right, the argument further, and for taxes as a way to reform society, and not just taxes to fund things that have reformed society, but taxes themselves, right, to drive change. I don't know. That'd be a good question.
But
Thanks a lot for the talk, Marianne. What I was thinking about throughout this was just the extent to which in German economics, they follow up, even now today, you have an economic theory exam, you have economic policy, and you have fiscal policy or Finanzwirtschaft. These are the Finanzwissenschaft. These are the three pillars, and they're really Adam Smith. And these three pillars we don't see as a normal part of the US academic programs in economics now, but it's just when we look, Seligman trained in German from Columbia, but Harvard really didn't have anybody doing public finance until Bullock around 1905 enters the program. And I was just thinking it was Thorsten Veblen who was doing it at Chicago, but on the whole, where are they doing public finance at the time? And it's Johns Hopkins in Wisconsin. And I just think it's because the Germans very early on had this notion of the three pillars, and Finanzwissenschaft is a third one. And that's why they're early in the game, thinking about it.
Yeah, I really agree with that. It's remarkable that Wisconsin, Columbia, and Johns Hopkins are where you really see the traffic, right, between America and Germany and the German public finance economists. Bullock is an interesting guy. He's a Commons student. Commons brought him from Johns Hopkins to Wisconsin when he moved, or not Commons, Ely brought him from Johns Hopkins to Wisconsin when he moved, and he hated Wisconsin. And he's very much a classical economist. And so he goes back to Harvard, and he's just, your run-of-the-mill sort of, classical public finance guy. It's always sort of the outside conservative voice that period. Anyway, he must have been quite a character.
I have a lot of questions, so maybe I will try to be very short to don't take too much time from Javier. For me, so I was surprised when I see this separation between fiscal debates and monetary debates, in particular in this period before the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank, where really the institutions were not actually completely defined and completely organized, where the national banking system was, and Jane talked about on Friday. And I have the impression that it's like there is really a division of labor. It's like if you have the monetary economists that are actually more scientific, they are more like experts working more on statistic. And actually, to the question of Maxime, they were economists, like Fisher, Kemmer. Well, actually, Taussig is maybe both. Commons, he also has some monetary, but it's like I don't know. I really need an explanation, but it's not for now. It's something to think about. My question is, or my comment is more about if there is any kind of education to fiscal, to understand what is a fiscal reform, what we need to pay taxes, because I think this is also a side or a very important point of progressive era. Not only expert, not only rational, not only institution, the expert, but also kind of we're gonna tell the people how to, but again, I have more comments than questions, so if you don't want to answer, we can continue the discussion later. But thank you for introducing these authors and these topics, and I think it's difficult to separate economics from politics, as you say in one of your slides. They tried, they couldn't, and I think it's also difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so now we can pass to our last presentation. Please, Javier, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen, and yes, is it working? Yeah, I think so. Is it? Yeah, I cannot hear you right now, but you hear me, don't you?
Yes.
Oh, okay, okay.
I can hear you, and it's perfect.
Yeah, okay, okay. So, well, thank you very much, and thanks you all for coming into this last session. Well, my paper, or my project, actually, it's something that can be a bit complementary to what Marianne has just presented, because I'm interested in the diffusion of these ideas into the political realm. So, and in this project, I was focusing on the presence and the usage of economic ideas, of fiscal ideas in the debate on the federal income tax of 1894, the first attempt to set up an income tax after the Civil War tax. So, of course, as Marianne has splendidly said, it's a central piece in the modernization of public finance in this progressive era, and so it's one of the it's a central feature of this period, right, of reforms. In this cartoon, you can see the victims of the income tax. I don't know if you can read the names, but here is Russell Sage, Hottie Green, and Jay Gould, and there were many others. Even in the debate in the House, it was commented about the 400 of New York that will be harmed by the income tax, the Vanderbilt, the Astors, etc., Rockefeller, and so on and so forth. So it was very clear that these guys were going to pay the tax. Okay, so here I'm dealing with economic ideas in politics. As Rebecca was saying, it's a complex interaction, this reception, appropriation, adaptation, uses and misuses of ideas. Here you have like plenty of opinions here and there, from Keynes' famous practical men are slaves or defunct economists, Jevons, who say that politicians act on the grounds of experience rather than upon theories, to name just some of the most famous ones, right? So here I'm dwelling on this comprehensive methodology, methodological tradition started with Gramp and followed by Coates and Winch that underlines the importance of contextual elements to see or to check the influence of economics in politics. And I'm concentrating on the policy making process here, in a particular one, the income taxes 1894, to see or to check or to have a look at how a set of ideas, of economic ideas, is mobilized in the parliamentary debate, incorporated or not to the discourse, and how in some occasions I do believe that at some point they can even shape the debate in a crucial way. And in my conclusions, or after my research that is still ongoing, and I have many things to do yet, and I only was able to check the debate in the House. I forgot about the Senate for the moment being, and some other some other sources that I would like to go through, like the press, etc. I only started a bit with that. But it is my impression that the debate in the House about the income tax in 1894 does reflect the necessity of policymakers, of politicians, to ground their opinions in solid economic on solid economic foundation. So it's important for them to hold opinions on strong arguments. And I think this is interesting for historians of economic ideas to see how really there was the presence of economic ideas there. Of course, many of them instrumental. This is undeniable, but I do believe that it is not just an ancillary instrument. There is something more about that. Now, very quickly this part, because Marianne has said something about that, and perhaps it's not important, the most important part of my project. So, personal income tax, fiscal revolution. It was called to change the configuration of the fiscal map of the U.S. to replace all taxes, etc., etc. Here I would like just to highlight this quotation by Seligman in his discourse to the American Economic Association, in which he was saying that, and this is something that Marianne has already said, that taxation has evolved towards a social considerations, not individuals. So hence the development of fiscal theory pointed at tax shifting and tax incidence, right? For this social view of taxation. The principle of justice is essential in this new consideration on the income tax. And another thing that Marianne has already mentioned is, so I am happy to have her paper before mine. It reflects the higher moral standards of society. So even if taxation, as Seligman again said, is a moral as well as a legal obligation, the personal income tax presupposes an advanced stage of social morality and political probity. So it is going to work as far as the society is becoming better from this moral perspective. The story goes like that. It was the debate on the Wilson-Gorman bill, which aimed at reducing the rates of the McKinley tariff, 1890. And in this discussion, Representative McMillan, Democrat from Tennessee, introduced an amendment which included a 2% tax on incomes over $4,000 US. And it was passed in the House and in the Senate. There were some precedents that of the Civil War and some state income taxes, like the Wisconsin that you said before, New York, and perhaps some others that I don't know really. Walker, in the statement in 1896, said that the accepted policy in the US was to obtain revenue from local and state purposes from direct taxation and for national purpose by duties on imports and internal excises upon liquor and tobacco. This is why setting up a federal income tax was such important step ahead, or shifting in the tax structure of the US. The story goes that it was declared unconstitutional in a very famous trial in the Supreme Court, 1895, and then you had the graduate income tax in 1930. Now, so getting down to the debate in the House, or the debate about the income tax, it was so commentators at that time said that it was extremely clear that the divide in the discussion was not party lines, but class interest. And of course, you had the financial and industrial interests of the North versus the working class and the farmers of the South and West. So it's something that was it was said by Seligman, by this Hill, and some others. It was extremely clear. And it was felt that the income tax was really a weapon to correct inequalities in the tax system. So Seligman says that actually there was not any fiscal need to cover the gap left by this decrease in the rate of the tariff. So it was the pretext, but not the cause. Also, there was this idea to redress the regressivity of the American tax system. The Democratic Party supported the bill, and the Republicans in principle were against that. Well, anyway, this is not extremely important. What is more important is that especially the supporters of the income tax, they sought to back their lines of reasoning on I would say, a strong economic foundation. So sources of authority, in search for a theoretical or scientific justification, it was supplied by great economists of the past, like John Stuart Mill and Adam Smith, always there, always present, but also the contemporaries, right? Ely, Walker, Thompson, Howe, Clark, some others. Adams was not there. Commons was not there, at least in the documentation I've seen, and Seligman was not there either. You can find many long quotations of the works of these economists in the House records, which I think is interesting, and which I have not found in other research I've made on income tax in other parts. Second, it's important the reputation that can be provided by the consideration that your arguments are backed by sound principles of political economy and fiscal theory. So the appellation to sound principles of political economy was constant in the debate, and I think it's interesting as well. And I think it is also mentioning these ideas and underlining that yes, the income tax is a sound, it fulfills the principles of sound taxation and so on and so forth. I think it at some point was a tool to build consensus among the representatives supporting the bill to pass it. So there is also, apart from gaining legitimation or legitimacy, it served to make a coherent position in favor of the tax. So very quickly, the main parts of the debate of the House, or the main sections. First one is the endorsement of the tax by economic authorities, and it was mentioned by many of the representatives, with quotations, with sometimes without quotations, but saying this and that and this and other. They supported income tax, and in their books, in their doctrine, they do support income tax. So here you have, of course, Adam Smith in the archi-famous excerpt from The Wealth of Nations. You have John Stuart Mill and some others, Robert Ellis Thompson. Saying that the most modern and theoretically fairest form of taxation is the income tax, a quotation from Elements of Political Economy. Francis Amasa Walker, income tax is in perfect accordance with the first maxim laid out by Adam Smith, etc., etc., etc. And here are the representatives that quoted them. Arthur Latham Perry, same. James Wilson, who was the founder of the Economist, in a quotation that I have not been able to trace back to where it comes from. I think it's a debate on the British income tax in the 1840s, and Frederick Howe, the Georgist, and in the same fashion. Okay, some of the opponents to the income tax also use this source of authority, quoting Smith to say that he would not have approved of the income tax, etc., etc., and some other sources like the English historian Thorold Rogers. Here we have an interesting representative, Uriel Hall, Democratic from Missouri, who displayed, and he made a very long speech displaying an enormous range of economists that supposedly would support the income tax, like of course Mill and Mill and Adam Smith, of course, and then you have Bastable, Jean-Baptiste Say, Garnier, Sachs, Visser, Constance Bondy, etc., and many others that perhaps sometimes the discourse is not easy to follow, and sometimes you really don't understand very well why is he appointing some of the economists. But anyway, it's interesting that he made this display of economic doctrines to support his position. Second, an important strategy for the supporters of the income tax in the House was to show up that the tariff was completely unfair and was harming the working class. So here you have some opinions, but all of them, of many of them, supported this opinion on the text again of these economists, like Ely in Taxation in American States and Cities, 1888, This other Davis, a populist representative from Arkansas, he leaned on Jefferson and Francis Amasa Walker. Maddox quoting John Stuart Mill, the best of taxes is if people were all honest, etc., etc., etc. I do think he said that we are in an emergency as if we were in a war, so we need the income tax. So even if Maddox was saying that the income tax should be applied in case of emergency, but we are in an emergency. And this Talbert, leaning on the authority of Thomas Sherman, who was another Georgist, and who was saying that that thanks to the tariff we have these railroad managers, manufacturers, oil refiners, etc., 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 accumulating fortunes so rapidly, as extremely rapidly. And America is a country where they've made money as crazy. So it is necessary to replace not to replace the tariff with an income tax, but to instaurate the income tax. Now, the problem of inequality again was mentioned by Marianne. So big debate on inequality, and interesting for me was to find that some of these representatives, they hand out statistical information for the sake of objectivity, right? So they say, hey, there is a very strong problem of inequality in the country, so this is why we need the income tax, and we have here the statistics that prove that. So here I have one published by this George K. Holmes of the Office of the Census in the Political Science Quarterly, saying that 91% of America's families own 29% of wealth. And this Davis again mentioning in statistics, which he didn't quote the source, but again, the same idea of concentration of wealth, therefore we need the income tax. And very quickly, there was also a little bit debate on the necessity to tax unearned incomes. So incomes that people is making, or wealth that people is making, because there's been a government intervention, or there's been an increase in population, there's been some external phenomena that have made the wealth of these people increase. And this was important in the debate on progressive taxation in the UK. And I think it's important here as well. So this wealth created by the government of other external agents, we need to tax that, because these guys have not done anything to create, to become so wealthy. They just profit from the circumstances. So it is fair that it's taxed. Now, the connection between the tariff and high wages. So some of the representatives against the income tax, they said, hey, the tariff is good, and it's been good because, yeah, of course, there's people that become richer thanks to the tariff. Yeah, but it is essential, it has been an essential agent in the increase in wages in America. And here we have the answer of this Williams, Democratic from Mississippi, that he displayed a vast range of quotations and authority of some economists to say, hey, this is not really true. And the economists here, credited economists here, say that it is not true, that the effect of the tariff is to increase wages. They had there was quite interesting exchange in this regard. And here you have the sources he used: Richard Ely again, this Carol Wright, the Commissioner of Labor Statistics. Interesting, because he said this man is a reliable, it is non-partisan source, and he says that evidence does not support that protection raises wages. So again, an appealing to a neutral sources, to objectivity, etc. Quotations of John Bates Clark, again, the same direction. So protection is not responsible for increasing wages. And again, Francis Amasa Walker. I'm going to skip you the taxation, the quotations. They're a bit long. And the end. So the last thing I want to, the last point I want to underline, the appealing to sound economics. So it is important that our positions are backed by sound economic principles, and both sides of the debate, they did that. So all these quotations by representatives saying that when you study it carefully, you find no warrant for it upon the principles of sound economics. So this Republican is against the income tax in saying, hey, I cannot find any sound principle in which you can link the income tax. Or Bartlett, again, against the income tax. It contravenes every principle of political economy. Johnson attacking the protectionists. You read political economy backward. You ignore its first and clearest principles, whatever they are, because sometimes they just launched this sentence and they didn't explain what they meant with that. Or Brian, who was a strong supporter of the income tax, one of the members of the Commission of Ways and Means in charge of drafting the bill. I desire here to enter my protest against the false political economy taught by our opponents in this debate. So my conclusions, what I already said, I think they did search for source of authority to back positions, and I have this quotation by Davis, one of the one of the strongest supporter of the income tax. Now I have here a large number of the very highest authorities on political economy. They all agree that the tariff should be superseded, at least supplemented by some more equal form of taxation, and they all agree that the income tax is the best to compensate inequalities of the tariff. So this is and then is the need for source of authority, the appeal to reputation provided by sound economics, and I think it is perhaps the same argument. Okay, it's the same thing, or they complement each other. I would also highlight that the debate was very polarized. I haven't said that, but it was polarized, and at some point it was important as well to produce some no-partisan sources to back more fundamentally the positions. And just to finish, this is my provisional conclusion on overall conclusion. I think that political economy was not just instrumental in the political debate, but was something important. Was something important to, I'm not going to say that representatives changed their vote after hearing these intellectual arguments, but I do believe that it was important in the creation of a state of opinion among policymakers, and of course what was translated to the society through the means, through the media, which I have not analyzed yet, but to back the position in favor of the income tax. And this is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Javier. So who wants to start? A little discussion, questions, suggestions?
Yeah, I'm trying to close the thing. Sorry, because I wait.
Let me try for that. And then I can.
Here. Stop share. Yeah, sorry.
Now it's okay.
It's perfect. Okay. Thank you.
So yes, Maxime, please.
Thank you, Javier. This is really fascinating. I think it's really a very interesting episode, and I wonder. I mean, of course, I haven't seen these kinds of case study for other episodes of tax reform or tax debates, but I don't know. I have a sense that yes, the authority of economists here is ever more present than it has been before, but also after that, in a way, with economics. I wonder if with economics becoming more specialized in the 20th century and more technical in a way, it creates a gulf between the policymakers and the economists, and then some of that discussion is only reserved for more technical debates, let's say in the Committee of House and Means or in the Joint Economic Committee after the war, but in a way that I'm not sure that, representatives, when they talk about tax reform in the 20th century, they would quote from economists in their debates. And I think this is quite extraordinary because, in other fields as well of policy, I don't think there's economists actually being quoted there as authoritative that often. So I think it's really interesting. And there was one case you probably came upon as well, but I saw once that William Stanley Jennings, Brian, sorry, he did quote also Adam Smith's first maxim of taxation in 1894. And so again, as one of these cases of authority citation in favor of the income tax. But I didn't know that there were so many others who were quoting Mill and Smith and so on. And I think this is, yeah, really interesting. Thank you.
Nicola, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Javier. Really interesting and fascinating story. And I was just wondering, and this is in connection also to a point that was raised before to the previous presentation. 4 years before, in the Senate debate about the Sherman Act, almost no economist was quoted. All the debate about the Sherman Act, I mean, a debate about competition and monopoly, was all legal. I mean, all the sources that were quoted during that debate were, you know, common law precedents and legal rules. And I wonder whether it was two possibilities, because classical economists hardly talked about monopoly, or was it because the important ideas in terms of monopoly and competition were common knowledge? So you didn't need to quote Adam Smith to explain that competition is good and monopoly is bad. That's really a curiosity, but it's also in relation to what was said before about the balance between economists and legal scholars in finance, in tax debates.
Javier, do you want to say something, or anybody else? Now we are.
May I?
There is a comment by Marianne in the chat. Sorry.
Yes.
Oh, sure. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your comments, and Marianne, Nicola, and Maxime. I'm well, actually, when I started having a look at the debates of the House, I thought it would be common in all the debates to find these quotations or these references to economists. But it seems, for what Nicolas says, that it's not the case, or what Maxime says. Actually, I do believe that, and perhaps Marianne is much more expert than me, of course, in this epoch and in these stories. But probably it's an important part of the. So the connection between or the presence of these progressive economists in the political discourse or in the general discourse in the median zone may be important to explain this the progress that we have at the time in this era, right? I cannot say much more because, as I was telling you, I've just checked this particular debate and in this particular occasion, right? But perhaps, well, I will need to have a look. Especially, I'm curious, for instance, to have a look at how the press received or transmitted the debates of the income tax. I have made a couple of tests in New York periodicals, but I couldn't find much more than this class divide, this political strategy. The New York Times, for instance, said that the Democrats were going to lose the partial elections because of their support to the income tax, because the industrial and financial power of the Northeast were completely alien to the idea of imposing an income tax, right? but not really references to these economists that we are dealing with. But of course, there are generalist newspapers that perhaps are not interested. They are interested just in political stuff, but not more ideological concerns. Anyway, so I cannot give a precise answer, actually. Sorry for that.
Well, I don't want to pass too much your time, and so I want to thank you, all of you, for your presentation, and all of you for attending this session. Thank you very much. And I text here, so see you next year in person, and have a beautiful Sunday evening.